Hello.
Welcome
Okay, there we go.
Welcome to What to Do When You Failed at a Full Sale.
Quiet.
Shall we begin?
Yeah.
Hey, nice Brink shirt. So thank you, everybody, for coming out today. This is our panel with the ZeniMax Online Studios audio team. They created audio for The Elder Scrolls Online. They'll be discussing how they brought audio from a formerly single-player franchise to the MMO world, how they created things like sound effects, monster noises, music, voiceover, all of that will be covered in this panel. And then we'll have questions after the panel. You can ask them anything either about audio from our game or audio in general, being in the game industry, that kind of stuff. So please don't forget, if you haven't already, to download the guidebook app, so that way you can kind of see information about this panel and all the other panels too. And then there's a feedback section at the end where you can fill out your feedback for MAGFest. So we will have some prizes at the end. Anyone who asks a question and get their questions answered, with the exception of you.
We've got a ringer.
He may or may not work with us. If you get your question answered, then you can have a prize. It ranges from t-shirts to little figurines, posters. You can get your posters signed by these guys afterwards if you'd like. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Brad Derrick. He's our audio director for Elder Scrolls Online, and please enjoy. Woo.
All right, so hello everybody, welcome. I am Brad Derrick, and we are going to talk a little bit today about creating audio for Elder Scrolls Online. When I say we, just a quick round of introductions. I'm Brad, I do the music, and I'm the audio lead. This is Becky Ignowski.
Woo.
I did it. She's in charge of the voiceover, and our sound design team, the guys who make sound effects, Bill Mueller, Matt Conway, hold your applause at the end, please. Matt Conway, Brian Brockett, and Josh Smith, who has the flu and is delirious, so clap a little harder for him.
Stay away from us.
Notice how he's way the hell down there.
This is as close as they let me get.
Yeah, as a rule. All right, so is it safe to say everybody in here's probably played an Elder Scrolls game at some point in their life? Probably, right. So, it is a long and famous franchise, going back almost, what is the math on that? 24 years. 23 years? Well, 2018 now. 24 years. Hugely popular, long-running franchise that our game is the latest in the series. So, we inherited everything that came before. And with a franchise that's this big and this beloved, there's a lot of lore, a lot of history, a big legacy that we have to be responsible for maintaining and moving forward. And the audio team in particular, we inherited the audio legacy from all of those previous games. So now we're sort of responsible for carrying the torch on that. So how do we do that? We came up with an audio design philosophy that, first and foremost, obviously we have to stay true to the franchise. We have to make sure that the game sounds like an Elder Scrolls game. When players jump in there, they've played other games, it feels familiar. It feels like the world of Tamriel. It sounds and feels like an Elder Scrolls game. You might even recognize some sounds that you've heard from other games. But we also want to put our own spin on it and make sure that it sounds like an Elder Scrolls Online game, not just a carbon copy of Skyrim or Oblivion or something that came before it. If you haven't played an Elder Scrolls game, the one of you who may not have played, the style of the game is, you've never played, Bill? Jesus. Does anybody want a job? Okay, that's one of the prizes Jeans gives out. Sound design slot, so stay seated.
That's how I got mine, so.
Yeah, look how that turned out. So the style of the game, it's a fantasy game. I guess you'd call it a fantasy game, dragons and magic and stuff like that. But it's not like high fantasy. It's not cartoony and tinkles and poofs and zings and stuff like that. It's more realistic, more grounded, gritty. So that was the baseline we started from, making sure that it sounded more realistic, more organic, taking great care across the board to make sure that things don't get too synthy or sci-fi-ish. Which is a fine line to walk when you're talking about a game that's full of magic and spells and dragons and things. That was one of those style points. We had to make sure that it sounded like realistic magic, if that's a thing. So we took this philosophy and applied it across the 3 pillars of game audio: sound effects, voiceover, and music. So we're going to start by looking at some sound effects, and I will hand it over to the sound effects team, which is right there. And here's Matt.
Hey. How's everyone doing? I'm Matt, one of the sound designers here. Well, you already met all of us, but yeah.
Hey!
So we have quite a few sounds that we can identify with the Elder Scrolls series. Many of you who've played have experiences and those that you can identify with. But we decided in our game we would continue one legacy, and that would be the Nern Root. So basically what we have areas where we've taken sounds directly from other games, but it's very minimal. We've done a lot of original work with our game. But this sound in particular, I figured we would show it to you guys just to annoy the ones who've heard it before and show the ones who've never heard it before.
If they maybe love it, maybe.
So this, the sound, again, started its life in Oblivion, and it's made its way to Skyrim and now to our game. The original file date was from July 30th of 2005, so it's an ancient relic. But anyway, here's the video. Enjoy. There you go.
I was hanging out with Lampert, who made the sound, and Brad was just mentioning not going too sci-fi, and that is literally just a synth chord.
It's probably the most sci-fi sound in our game.
That is the most sci-fi Elder Scrolls sound.
So not only do we grab sounds from previous games and use them as needed or as necessary, we also design some of our sounds on previous titles, and I'll hand it off to Brian for that.
A good example of that is the Dark Brotherhood Black Door. So anybody who doesn't know the Dark Brotherhood, I'm assuming a lot of you have already played, so you know, but it's basically the assassination guild, and they have a door to their bases that's called the Black Door, and it speaks to you in a riddle, and the only way you can get inside the guild's base is to answer the riddle. It's existed most recently in Skyrim, where it sort of had a really cool, iconic treatment, but it's been, in the games, the previous games that have come out. So when I looked at that, my first thought was maybe I should reinvent the wheel. I'll make something new. But the more I listen to it, the more I'm like, wow, this is really iconic. I'm sure people know this. So I kind of decided that, since we didn't really have a Nern route to carry over, I'll just kind of do my best attempt at recreating what was there. So I kind of had to siphon it down to what are its parts and then recreate its parts. One of the elements in the Skyrim sound is like a kick drum. It sounds like a kick drum to me that it kind of goes off of the thump thump like a heartbeat, which I started off trying to do by using a kick drum, but it just didn't sound right. It didn't sound as big. I wanted it to sound bigger than what came before it. So I actually went to what they were alluding to anyways, which was a heartbeat, and then I messed with that, made it big, ominous, scary, and then there's the voice element too, and basically I just had to kind of recapitulate what they did for that, and I ended up doing sort of more of my own take. But here is the one from Skyrim, and then the one from Elder Scrolls Online.
What is the music of life? You are not worthy. What is the flavor of fear? Welcome home.
I'll pass back to Matt.
Oh, hey, thanks.
There you go, buddy.
All right. So yeah, that was nicely done. So for our game, we've had a lot of new sounds that we've had to make. We have new game mechanics, especially since we're a multiplayer game. So one of the things that we had to work on that was unique to our title was something called a dark anchor or a dolmen. Some of you may have heard of that if you played our game. So it's a huge world-changing, huge world-changing event that happens. It's dynamic. There's a lot of moving parts. There were visual effects. There were the actual fixture of it coming in, the anchor, the chains, and all the NPCs doing their thing. So we had to cover that with all the sound. The making of it was pretty awesome. It was fun. It was a lot of, like I said, a lot of moving parts, but it was a blast to work on. There's a video coming up, but the main element you'll hear when it first starts is kind of like a call. In designing it, I wanted it to be like really unique and iconic and noticeable, recognizable, all that stuff. So you hear it from far away, you'll know something's happening, and you'll run over there and want to join in. In designing it, I used basically a horn that Brad gave me. Thanks.
You're welcome.
And also mix that with like a big I-beam metal scrape sound and pitch them together, and the grittiness of the I-beam helped ground it in the world and give it like a nasty feel for Molag Bal being such a nasty dude. And beyond that, you'll hear the rest of the sound was designed using trains and explosions, jet flybys, thunder, and even a space shuttle takeoff sound, which was my favorite part.
Well, the thing about the space shuttle sound that I like, that's the one that you hear from the farthest away.
Right.
So you can be halfway across the zone or something, and you hear this like rippling, like the air ripping apart in the slow rumble.
Right.
And you know, like somewhere off to the west, a dark anchor is coming down because it's just the atmosphere is tearing apart.
Yeah, that was one thing we designed in that, since you could see it from so far away, we needed to make sure you could hear it from far away and identify that location. And what we did, you have a very near sound that plays while you're underneath the portal fighting. But as you run away, you'll hear it transition into a distant sounding, like air ripping, distortion sound. But anyway, it came out pretty well. This video won't necessarily show that aspect, and unfortunately, the very end explosion is missing. Never mind. I'll keep that. But anyway, yeah. So here's a video of it, and
Find our worlds.
Bind this world with your chains. Draw it ever closer to your realm.
So just quickly too, I mean, this was like, as they were saying earlier, like this was our opportunity to do something that would be iconic for our game. And I think that this is something that if you've played our game, a lot of the people comment about the Dark Anchor sound. I think Matt did a great job of making something that we could put our stamp on and say that this is from our game. So kudos for that.
thanks, buddy.
Yeah, it's a great sound. Which one was the shuttle takeoff? I'm trying to pick out the different sounds.
Just this, I don't even know if you can hear it in here. It's the really low. It's just.
Yeah, it's a little hard to hear on this video, but it was used in actual like destruction of it. It was used there, but it was also used as you go really far away from the portal. You could hear it like ripping in the air. Yeah, that's where it's mainly used.
Taking a single-player franchise that everybody knows, everybody loves, and turning it into a multiplayer game is challenging. I mean, making any MMO these days is really, really challenging because the scope of what you have to make, like how many things you have to make, is crazy. A single-player game, just imagine, so however many fireballs you needed to make, multiply that by 10, and then we're talking like, magnitudes of whatever we're making. Just to kind of give you an idea of, currently in our game, after we've launched and released a bunch of DLCs, we've got 600 total abilities, made up of 300 abilities that are parts of skill lines and 300 abilities that we've released since launch that are all item abilities. If you siphon that down, we've got 5 classes, 3 skill lines each, 5 abilities, 1 ultimate, 2 morphs. That's a lot of ability sound to make. So you tack onto that, you've got 130 unique creatures that all have their own abilities, all have their own voices, all have their own movement sounds. Then we have to make all the ambience, everything else. We ended up with currently, and I'm sure this number is growing and will grow by the time we get to the next release, more than 31,000 sounds, which is ridiculous.
Which doesn't count music or VO.
No, that doesn't even count music. Or we'll get to VO numbers in a few minutes. And while we're doing that, we still have to maintain that high level of Elder Scrolls aesthetic. We need it to be, fantasy, but it's grounded in something that feels natural to you. I mean, that's kind of like the magic of Elder Scrolls. It's like, it's magic, but it doesn't feel like magic, or it sounds like something that, you're looking at it, oh yeah, okay, that's a fireball, I get that. And then it's also got to be, for our game specifically, since it's multiplayer, it's got to be easy on your ears. It's got to be something, we have to make impactful sounds, but not things that are going to fatigue your ears, because a lot of people play the game for a long time, and you're going to hear those same fireballs, those same abilities over and over again. So if we made something that's piercing or shrill, you're going to take your headphones off, or you're going to turn your speakers down. And then on top of that, we also have to make it iconic and something that you can recognize, because not only does it have to sound cool because it's Elder Scrolls, but it has to give you feedback. I mean, it's got to be something you could recognize, a Templar sounds like a Templar, or a Nightblade sounds like a Nightblade. Because not only do you want to hear your sounds that sound really cool, and I'm doing all my Templar abilities, but you also want to hear that guy that you can't see on screen. Oh, a Nightblade just came and teleport struck me. And then you know what that sounds like, because you know what a Nightblade sounds like. Sorry. I knew it was. Because when you're in Cyrodiil and you're playing 100 people versus 100 people, it gets to be really intense. And not only is it a challenge of making content, but it's also a technical challenge to make sure that you actually hear what you want to hear, which is something that Bill handled really well. Because this is what Cyrodiil sounds like after we've done all that work.
So yeah, I mean, the biggest difference, obviously, for a game like ours is the amount, just the scope, the amount of people, the amount of stuff that's happening on screen at any given time. So in a case like that, where our audio engine's getting hundreds of calls per second to do stuff, how do we manage that? We can't play hundreds of sounds; it'd be confusing for the players, and also we can't play hundreds of sounds because people's computers wouldn't be able to handle all of that. So we have to sort of come up with a way to manage what's actually going through the system. To do that, we have a system that we refer to as mine versus yours, or MVY for short. Mine being anything that you, the player, are actively doing or is actively happening to you, and yours being sounds that are being done by other players or other monsters or that kind of thing. And we use that data to drive 3 different points, one being volume. So when you trigger an ability or something like that, your volume is going to be a consistent, we don't change it, we don't turn it down, we don't turn it up, your volume is consistent. Everybody else around you, however, we lower that volume. So your stuff is always the loudest in the mix. So that should give you the feedback of, yes, I'm the one throwing that fireball out, that jackass threw the fireball at me. I know what's going on. You can hear what's happening. The next thing that we do is priority. So this is more for performance reasons, but we can't play hundreds and hundreds of sounds at once. It would just be a mess and the systems would crush. So we give sounds a priority number. So in other words, what can we start to cull out? What can we start to delete and not play? So again, the system will say, okay, well, you did this. We're going to give this the highest priority. We're never going to change that number. You're always going to have your sounds play. Everybody else around you, however, will get lower priority, and it actually will decrease in priority the further away they are from you. So if you're in a big fight with 20 people standing around you and there's another big fight happening 40 meters away, 50 meters away, those guys' sounds will get culled before anything happening around you, and they'll, again, give you the feedback that you need without crushing your system. And the last thing we do is more for surround mixing, is for positional stuff. Anything that you play will actually be put to the front of your surround speakers, so it's always there in front of your face, what's happening. And everybody else will utilize the rest of your surround speakers. And so that, again, that sort of opens up the space to be here's my stuff and here's everything that's happening around you, and you can sort of separate that a little bit and give yourself room to hear what's happening and that kind of thing. So yeah, so that's how we sort of go around and get around all the stuff that we have to do. Yeah, go all the way down there.
Bill.
All right, we're going to see how this goes. I have been really sick all week. I don't even know where I am right now. I do all of the monsters for the game. Not all of them, but I do most of the monsters for the game. I went backwards. Oh, you had it to me upside down. One of the first things that I like to do when I go into making a monster is I like to learn the lore behind it. We have Lawrence, our lore master in the studio, who is able to give you a lot of information, but a lot of the time I'll just go to the wiki that all of the players keep up, and I'll just read about what's in there.
So thank you.
Because believe it or not, you guys know a lot more than we do a lot of the time.
If you want to screw up his monster sounds, go to the wiki and edit them.
You guys are a great source of information. One of the first monsters that I used my own voice to do was the Manticora when we did Craglorn. And I wanted it to have sort of like a human-like guttural voice because they're these incredibly intelligent, incredibly dangerous, created monsters. And I wanted it to have a human-like voice because we're humans. The more something sounds like us, the more we're willing to think that it might be intelligent. And I wanted to give sort of this intelligent, dangerous monster a voice that we could kind of identify. And so here's an example of me doing the voice in my recordings and then how it turned out once it got into the game.
By the way, Josh, aren't all those crappy shop jobs fan art that were sent?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the first time that I was on ESO Live, I had mentioned that I'd done the voice for the Manticore, and people immediately started making those pictures out of it. Another monster that is kind of in that same way is the Yokuden Tomb Guardians that we did for the Thieves Guild content. That was sort of the first chance that we started to get introduced to tonal magic in Elder Scrolls Online, which is sort of a big thing in the Elder Scrolls world. And the Yokuden Tomb Guardians were explained to me as they sort of keep themselves together through this tonal magic. And based off of the name, I started thinking Tibetan throat singing as a way to go for their voices because it just sounded right. And we have a guy at the studio named Renard who has literally the best voice of all time. And I try to grab him to use him for stuff for monsters whenever I can. And I went to him and I was like, have you ever wanted to try doing Tibetan throat singing? And he said, I've been waiting my whole life for somebody to ask me that. So I got him into my room and we did some recording. And it turned into... The bird wasn't part of it, that's just the bring it to life. I think you have my stuff out of order. Oh yeah, bring it to life. So one of the things that I like to try to do on top of going through the lore to try and figure out how monsters work is I like to go to the designers who are making everything and ask them what they want something to sound like, because a lot of the time they'll have ideas for what they want a thing to be. It's their content. I want to make them happy. And so I'll go to them and I'll say, what do you want the Wraith of Crows to sound like, Greg Roth? And Greg says, I want it to sound like the screams of damned children and birds. And I'm like, okay, all right, we can do that. So I hopped up on Facebook, and I posted up there, just open to everybody. If you've ever wanted to send me the sounds of your children screaming, now would be the time to do it. And a surprising amount of people like to make their kids scream. And I got a lot of files from people, and I took those and I started to cut them up. The rest of the voices, I have sounds of children playing in schoolyards. I went through a lot of different types of birds. I also picked out a lot of sort of cuter, sort of Tweety birds to hide in there at certain points to kind of throw it off a little bit more, just make it weirder. It's a weird monster. It's dark and it's creepy, and sometimes if you can add a little cuteness to a creepy thing, it ups the creepiness even more. And so here's a little, some children screaming. This is kind of the stuff that I got. So you can hear in there, sort of buried in the mix with the other parts of the voice, are the little kids screaming, poking out over the course of the sound. That one was a lot of fun to do. Another cool thing to do is to make something sound how it looks. You want to keep people in the game. You want to keep them immersed. You want to keep people part of things. And that's why it's fun to get to work on things like the Skeeveton that we just did for the Clockwork City. Sothasiel likes cats. He has the Skeevetons running around the city. They're basically toys. They're very cute. They're fun. You get to be one in the content. Spoiler, sorry. And so they're really cool. And so I wanted to do something that sort of like spoke to it being sort of a cute toy. But also on top of that, it is something that can do things. It is a piece of technological equipment. And so when it's doing things like scanning stuff, I tried to make the sounds a little bit more serious and heavy. But the bass sounds for the Skeeveton when it's running around are actually Bill's son's toys. I took a lot of kids' toys and I sort of EQ'd them all differently, pieced them together to make the sounds for the Skeeveton as it goes around the world. And it's all based off of things like this. So you can see how when it's doing the scanning, it gets a little more serious about how it sounds, but the rest of the time it's a toy. The idea of doing sound design is just to or doing monster sounds, is to just take these disparate elements and try and build them into something unique and new. A lot of the time you work with your voice as a base to give a sound shape, and then you start to bring in lower elements. You go with lions or tigers, things that have very deep guttural voices. Top that off with, like a horse or a pitched up chicken. Pitched up chickens are great. They sound horrible. Elephants. Pitch an elephant up and you have a dragon screech as long as you throw a lion underneath it. And so that is a lot of what I do for the game. And I think we're now going to Becky for VO.
We're figuring out how to use the buttons.
I've never used the clicker before.
Found scripts.
Hi, I'm Becky. I'm responsible for the voiceover in the game. The really fun and glamorous part of my job is I actually get to go out to LA and work with the actors and work with the directors and stay in fancy hotels and take selfies and send them to these guys to make them jealous.
Which she doesn't brag about at all.
But 10 to 11 months out of the year, I'm in the office working really hard because, as everyone has mentioned, it's really complicated to make an MMO. So our VO stats alone are quite impressive. Yeah, so we currently have 190,000 dialogue files in the game, and that's just English. We have 3 other languages too. 25,000 sound sets, which are combat grunts and coughs and sniffles and burps and stuff like that. Yeah, lots of time in the studio. We have 6,290 pronunciation words. So these are like the Elder Scrolls Tamrielic words that are hard to pronounce. So it's important that all of the actors say these words the correct way and consistently. So we get our lore master, Lawrence Schick. We record him pronouncing these words properly, and then we cut them up into usable audio files. So when the actors come across those words in the script, we can play it for them and they can hear how it sounds. And it could be names of people like King Fajarahad or Vashrak or, words like that.
Easy.
We currently have a total of 92 actors. And just for comparison, like the first voice game, which was Oblivion, and they had 14 actors, I believe. So, yeah, Morrowind. Sorry, it was Morrowind. We started out casting. We inherited the 9 races that are in all the games. Breton, Redguard, Orc, Altmer, Bosmer, Dunmer, all those guys. And of course, the accents that go along with them. Yeah, and we started off in our launch zone with 75 actors, and then we brought on 10 special actors, which are more of the big name ones, to play our main quest. I have a little video for you of a couple behind the scenes with some of our bigger actors, and that's pretty cool.
My character is the comic relief in the game, Sir Cadwell. He's a kind of Don Quixote character. One fine day in the middle of the night, 2 dead kings got up to fight. Back to back they faced each other, drew their bows, and stabbed themselves.
I voice Queen Iren in this, and she is a queen, so she's quite tough and uncompromising, but then seems to have a softer side and a humorous side. And I've enjoyed all of that stuff, but I did quite like when I had to talk to somebody who turned into a cat, but I was a man. I've been a man as her twice, and that was quite fun. I wasn't expecting to have to do that, so it's nice.
I'm Malcolm McDowell, and we've been working on the Elder Scrolls. And I'm playing the part of Little Mo. He's an evil bastard.
Yeah, Malcolm McDowell was Molag Ball, but he liked to call himself Little Mo. We also had, who else did we have? Jennifer Hale. We brought back Linda Carter to play Azora, because she's Wonder Woman. Michael Gambon, and there was 11 altogether. I just can't remember.
Nye, Alfred Molina.
Yeah. Oh, Peter Stormare, who's awesome. He was wearing a pink Hello Kitty book bag.
And now you know.
Yeah, and so since we're an MMO and we're constantly putting out new content, it gives us the chance to learn from our mistakes, listen to player feedback. We're always on the forums seeing what you guys say about the sound and voiceover, and we like to fix stuff. Early on, our process wasn't as smooth as it is now. We've made a lot of improvements to our tools, which in the end gives us a better quality voiceover. For example, I've seen people complain on forums that we don't have enough actors, or they hear the same actor everywhere. So we're always bringing in new actors. We have some new ones coming up that are a surprise. One time, the Weird Sisters, there's some characters in the game, they were all talking in German, and I don't think we ever figured out why, but that was fun to fix. We had to put out a patch to fix that.
The best part was some percentage of the player base, which remain unnamed, didn't realize it was German, and they thought it was some obscure Tamrielic language. They're like, oh, that's awesome. The Weird Sisters are like, Dein das Kleine. Like, yeah, that's German. That's on us.
Working as designed. And then here's one of our most classic bugs. So this kind of slipped through the cracks. In the studio, we did not realize that this guy was supposed to be a big giant tree. So I have a little video. It's the original one we had in, and then everyone said it was terrible or thought it was funny, so we fixed it. So here's both.
Oh ho, the briars, you say. The briars carry my heart within them. They protect it with their very lives. There's a lot to give to protect a tree, especially one as old as me. Tell me, why do you want to join my briars?
Oh, the briars, you say? The briars carry my heart within them. They protect it with their very lives. It's a lot to give to protect a tree, especially one as old as me. Tell me, why do you want to join my briars?
Yeah, so you guys like the first one better, right? No, but we're always listening to feedback, learning from our mistakes, stuff like that.
And part of that too with that one was once we realized this guy was supposed to be a tree, Becky went out and got someone who would talk like a tree, but then we also do what we refer to as VOP. So a person just talking isn't going to talk like a tree, right? We have to make them sound like a tree. A person like Malcolm McDowell doing Malak Ball, who's this ginormous guy who could pick you up with his hands, isn't going to sound like Malcolm McDowell. He's got to sound like Malak Ball. So we have a process we refer to as VOP, or voice over post-production. This is when we take humans and make them not sound human, right? So an example of that was the tree guy. He didn't sound that low and all that kind of stuff. We took his voice and we processed it so that it did. And half of it is Becky getting the, awesome performance out of it and then bringing it back and then us sort of messing with it and getting him to sound like an actual tree. And a really good example of that for our game is the factotum. If you've played our recent Clockwork City DLC, these factotums are creatures created by Sotha Sil that sort of walk around the city and do all the fixing up things and making sure that wrong people don't get into the city, that kind of thing. And they're these, for the lack of a better term, robotic beings. They don't have flesh, they're not people, they're just these robots that sort of walk around the city. They're made out of metal. And so when we got the actors to come in and do the reading, okay, we got them to sound like robots, but now how do we get them to sound like robots? How do we go through that process, right? So I wanted to sort of just quickly walk through a little bit of how we kind of do that. So the very first video you're going to see is the actual dry reading from the actress who did it. She sounds like a robot, but doesn't sound like a robot just yet. And so how we kind of step through all of that. So this is the dry version.
Welcome, potential resident. Please speak your birth name, followed by the name of your sponsor.
It's really funny because when they were doing the factotums in the studio, all of the actors were like going like this as they read their lines. That was Sarah Tanzer, who was awesome. She had like 300 lines and she was like Siri.
Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah, she did a great job with that. And which makes my job easier when I'm trying to make them sound like a robot, which I'll show later, because it just, again, it's 50% already there. So the factotum was done in 3 different parts. There's going to be the base layer. This is where I need to make the sound as if it's coming from inside of a robot. So it's the residents that you hear a voice through a tin can or a trash can or something like that. So these guys are made completely out of metal. They're hollow. There's really nothing inside of them. This is what the voice would sound like coming from something like a tin can. Oh, sorry.
Welcome, potential resident. Please speak your birth name, followed by the name of your sponsor.
So you can hear the sort of, it sounds like it's coming through a metal sort of device. The next thing we need to do is the speaker layer. There's got to be some way that you can hear this voice, right? So in Tamriel, they don't generally have speakers. That's why we use quotations. But how are you hearing this voice? And so I had to take the voice now and then make it sound as if it was coming through some sort of device. And so I kind of, added a lot of distortion to it, made it sound like it was coming through a small little radio speaker or something like that. And that sounds like this.
Welcome, potential resident. Please speak your birth name, followed by the name of your sponsor.
And then you have the noise layer. So this is where I wanted to make the factotum sound a little bit different. I wanted the sort of the voice to, these guys are old. They've been around for a long time. This technology is not super, super amazing. It should sound a little bit dirty. So I experimented a lot with adding random noises, bits and buzzes and things like that, but it really wasn't sounding natural. It wasn't fitting. It didn't make me all excited to hear. So I had this idea. What if I took the actual voice, the actual line that was being spoken, processed the shit out of it, and made it sound not like a voice anymore. It had no words. It was just random noises coming from this thing. And what was neat about it was it was noises that were sort of talking to each other, right? Because it was the actual actor or actress actually saying the word that I'm taking that and making it sound into noises. So it was an actual sentence being said by noises, but there's no words. So it kind of worked out really well, and it felt natural. So when everything sort of came together, it sort of worked really cool. So I'll play that noise bass for you so you can hear what that sort of sounds like. And again, you listen to it, you can hear it's almost as if noises are talking. And then, when you combine all of that together, you get your factotum.
Welcome, potential resident. Please speak your birth name, followed by the name of your sponsor.
And that's how we do it. So yeah, that's how the factotum ends up being a factotum at the end of the day. So.
How many factotum lines were there? Do you know, roughly?
The female factotums had probably around 300, but then we had specific factotums like the precursor who had about 100.
So there's hundreds of lines.
Yeah.
This wasn't one file. Bill
No,
did that
yeah.
to hundreds of lines in
yeah.
English and then hundreds of lines in French, German, and Spanish. So this wasn't some exercise like, I'm going to make this one line
No,
of
yeah,
dialogue
yeah,
sound
yeah.
cool.
Right.
So I'm going to make 1,000 lines of dialogue sound cool.
Right.
All right, music. That's my thing. Hey, look. All right, so the challenge of Elder Scrolls music. First and foremost is it's a hugely popular series with a hugely popular soundtrack. And we inherited all that. And what the hell am I doing? Okay. Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim, those soundtracks are by Jeremy Soule, and they are fantastic. I was already a huge fan of the games and a huge fan of the soundtracks before I even started working on this game. Once I found out I was going to be working on this game, it was kind of like, oh, shit. All right, so first thing I had to do was try to reverse engineer the music, the style. It's got a very unique and identifiable style. That music sounds, in my opinion, unlike any other music in any other games. It's very identifiable. And in Elder Scrolls games, not only has the music been great, but it's nearly constant. Like, it's a big part of the sound of the game. When you're playing Skyrim or Oblivion and you're going through the world, it's not like music pops up once in a while to sort of punctuate some moment. It is wallpapered throughout the entire game, and it is the sound of the game in many ways. And specifically, a thing we inherited, obviously, is the main theme, the melody of the Elder Scrolls, which has been with us since Morrowind, and is super identifiable with the franchise. Much like the Star Wars theme or Star Trek or anything else, as soon as you hear the first few notes, you know exactly where you are and what you're in for. So here's the old school. Pretty awesome, right? So whether it's plinky little harps, horns and strings, big burly dudes, you can recognize that melody, and it's been interpreted and redone many ways, but you recognize it. You know where you are and you know what you're in for. So we had to stay true to that musical language, identifying and kind of reverse engineering what makes the music tick, very specific things like, hey, there's a lot of distant sounding French horns and everything's drenched in reverb, to more sort of abstract things about the aesthetic, or, oh, everything is very intensely personal and sweepingly emotional, and things like that. But then take all that, and again, like everything else we've said so far, kind of put our own twist on it and try to make it our own. So you're like, yeah, I hear this. It sits well with the Elder Scrolls music. It is Elder Scrolls music, but it's a little different. It's Elder Scrolls Online music. So one direct version of that is we took that theme, we used that as the launch theme for the title when we did the Morrowind a year ago, I guess. We redid the title theme, and that was kind of a throwback to the Morrowind theme again. That melody has appeared sometimes obviously and sometimes less so throughout the game. So here's just a quick couple examples of the way we've used that melody. pronounced spooky, by the way. All right, so for the, oh God. God's sakes. All right, I do this all the time.
You want me to help?
I'll be fine. For the music nerds out there, if there are any, like the spooky one took the theme. The theme is in minor. It's a minor key. The spooky one converted that to an octatonic theme, which instantly makes everything sound scary. The Facebook one, I played it in major one day on the piano, and it was so amusingly cheesy that Bill turned it into a Facebook video. So
It's beautiful.
that one unfortunately hasn't made it into the game yet, but I'm holding out
Soon,
hope that we'll find a place to use it. Another interesting element was the lyrics to the vocal content of the game. I'm not a big fan of when soundtracks are used sort of fake Latin or whatever. You know, the singers are singing, like, what are they singing? Oh, it's just gibberish. Because of our game and our lore and our history, we could actually lean on actual Tamrielic languages. So it's not just singing some syllabic gibberish. It's translatable in most cases to actual words. So when we redid the Morrowind theme, that was one of the ideas, was, again, Lawrence Schick, the guy who knows all this stuff, wrote some lyrics for our new shiny Morrowind theme song in some like dead dark elf language that I can't even pronounce. And we taught it to all these singers who are like, what the hell are we singing? We're like, just go ahead and do it, it's gonna be fine. And it sounded like this. So in the interest of time, if there are any questions, we do have a little more stuff we could yap about, but we've only got 10 minutes left. So if anybody has questions, I wanted to give people the opportunity to ask them. I think our lovely microphone wielder will come around.
Hello. Hi. When it came to the voice acting, did you have a lot of trouble syncing it in like real time, like when you're talking to an NPC, for example, and just like matching the animations to the sounds?
I didn't quite hear you. Did you say
Matching the VO to NPCs.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah, the
so
face
we
match.
have a team that just runs face effects. It's a pretty automated process, and yeah, no trouble.
Yeah, there's a program called Face Effects, which is built for this kind of stuff, and we just push this giant red button, literally, during the build process.
It really does
and
that. It's
I
amazing.
think the way that it works is it reads the shape of the waveform
Yeah.
and then makes the mouth move.
Essentially,
and
yeah.
records
Yeah.
a file that
That's
does
syllabic.
So again, like we mentioned at the beginning, we'll give anyone who gets their question answered a cool little thing. Jessica's right there. She has stuff, so she'll walk around and give you some stuff.
Oh, now everybody's got questions.
Yeah, right? I have a question.
Ask away.
I love what you guys did with the tracks, like when you updated it for the Morrowind chapter. So, thank you for doing that. It's really awesome. I noticed the original theme song is nowhere to be found in the game, though. Is that something that you guys are just, that's a thing in the past, you're not going to see it again, or would you consider inserting it somewhere in the game, like maybe somewhere in Cyrodiil, for example?
I have. I just don't know where to stick it, honestly. No jokes on that, please. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, so there it is, right? It's this great shut up, Bill. It's this great 5-minute piece of music, and I don't know what to do with it. You can't, I mean, that's not ambient music for a zone, right? I could turn it into a combat piece or something, so it's on the table. Just haven't done anything with it yet, honestly.
Gotcha. Okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah.
that guy back there had his hand up at the very beginning.
Hi, I just wanted to ask if you guys are adding any more tavern music, you know, that the bards play, and if so, do you have any samples we can listen to?
Becky, would you care to sing one for us? New bard songs. Yes, to the first. We added, I think, a half a dozen new songs for Morrowind, but they only were in Morrowind. And with the next chapter, we will, again, add another half a dozen songs. I'm not sure where they'll be, but once a year, we break out the ukuleles and write some new tavern music, yeah.
Hi, my question is about the changes that tend to happen over time. For example, when you have a sound or a voice actor that's no longer available or it doesn't quite fit what you wanted anymore, sometimes you have to go back and change that. Do you ever have any situations where you've had to redo the sound and you attempt to try to fit it as best as possible, but sometimes, and what kind of examples would you have of that?
I think you should talk about Recat.
I don't know why
We did the
got all his hair.
stamina sound a dozen times.
I mean, the Silt Strider is a really good example.
Yeah, the Silt Strider. When we made the Silt Strider, I went back to the original sounds, and I got the original Silt Strider sounds. They were really old, and actually not made by someone who was a sound designer, so they were not very clean. And I took those original files, and I cleaned them up, got the noise out of them, and I put them in the game, and then I expanded it, because really all a Silt Strider is a whale run through a reverb and a delay. So there you go if you want to make your own Silt Strider sound. And so that was something that we had to update, but a changing sound over time, I jumped in, is the out of stamina sound is a sound that I made a dozen times. I don't even think we are still happy with it, but the last version of it ended up in the game so long that players were like, yes, that sound works, so we stopped messing with it.
As a recent audio engineer graduate, I'm having trouble getting his foot in the door. What advice would you give to kind of get into a game studio, or any programs that you would advise learning?
We would be very happy to discuss that at length in the hall. We get asked that all the
short
time.
answer
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah,
many ways,
awesome.
but yeah.
All right.
Absolutely.
So meet with us.
Meet people.
Yeah,
Get
meet
to
people.
Get to know people.
That's like the biggest thing you can do. Hi, nice to meet you.
Hello. I was wondering if during development, because of the scope of the sounds that you had to actually create, if you ever considered doing any procedural generation, or if is it all just like sounds you've had, or do you have to like also go and record stuff?
Was the question, do we use a lot of...
Do you use a procedural generation at all in your workflow at all, or is
procedural.
it all just recorded?
I don't think so.
No, yeah, most of the stuff we create, you know...
Not for sound design.
Yeah, for hand and by hand and stuff like that. Yeah.
And then the second part was, do you actually create sounds from scratch using synthesis, or is it all recorded?
Well, we usually start with like an organic element, like we'll take a waterfall, and then we'll mix in a synthetic element. If we need something tonal, we'll use synths. I know Josh likes to use this.
I use a lot of synths.
Yeah.
We tend to start with like organic stuff. We'll record when we can original recordings, but yeah, we
do
everything.
Anything we can do, we'll use.
We have pretty extensive sound libraries.
Right.
Nothing in the game is just something grabbed out of a sound library and put into the game.
I won't allow that.
Good.
As long as Brad is listening, nothing in the game is just grabbed out of the sound library.
Plus, creatively, it's nice, to challenge ourselves and to use obscure things and destroy the sounds and mangle them and then turn them into something completely different.
That's part of the fun, I think.
It's kind of sound collaging a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Cutting things apart and putting them back together.
We could do a whole nother panel on all the sounds that they have snuck into the game without my knowledge that I found on live and then had to come back and tear them a new asshole.
We finally got our fart sound into the game.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, horses farted.
Yeah. Does anybody remember horse farts? Anybody?
When they got turned into mounts, we very quickly had to get out of the game because even with it was like a 0.1% chance to play, people
and it was a
were
real
hearing
sound. It was a real horse fart.
It was a real horse fart.
We designed it. You would sit by a stable for an hour and you get to hear a horse fart once. Next thing you know, you got 20 people riding 20 horses and
Hi,
couple
I
left.
kind of had like a two-part question. So, like, for the scores, do you actually have access to the scores when you're reinterpreting them for, like, the game? Like, you're not the original composer of the theme? And also, like, what kind of tools do you guys use to, like, implement them? Because, like, you're dealing with a lot of sounds. There's, like, 196,000 sounds for voice acting alone times 4 languages. Like, do you guys, like, code all that in separately, or, like, do you guys use any tools for that?
We use a ton of tools. So the first part was the musical scores?
Yeah, scores, like, do you have access to previous scores?
Well, I wrote them, so I have access to them. But for the Jeremy Soule stuff...
Yeah, for the Jeremy Soule stuff.
Yeah. So it's just pick it up by ear. Like, we'll go and I'll just listen to it. And not only the main theme, but once in a while I'll drop little nuggets like, oh, I like that cello line from this Morrowind piece. I'm going to go hide it in a cave over here in Morrowind. And within an hour, some Morrowind fan's like, I found that cello melody. I mean, it doesn't take long for people to find this stuff. So those I just pick up by ear. Tools, yeah, we got tons of tools. We got proprietary in-house. We got off-the-shelf like Wise. Wise is the best audio middleware, and they didn't pay me to say that. We have so much VO that even Wise was like, we can't do this. So we're constantly pushing the limits of what that off-the-shelf stuff can do. So we have to get their code and kind of expand on it on our own. Our audio programmer, David Jorgensen, who's amazing, spends tons and tons of time making sure that our game can handle 800,000 lines of dialogue fairly easily. Fairly?
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think
Go to
maybe
the
one
back
more.
and work my way up.
Yeah, we're almost
Yeah.
out of time.
Just 2 more minutes.
When it comes to inherited music, it seemed from like each game, Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim, the music got more epic. Where do you see, like, when for the next game, potentially, how can you make it more epic than like Skyrim?
3 words: Norwegian black metal.
Fair enough.
The music in general, another thing I like about their scores and that we try to do with our score is there's a huge continuum. I mean, you can have big ball-busting pieces, but there's a lot of really nice, peaceful, pretty, quiet stuff. So our game does that too. You know, there's big boss fight and dark anchor music and things, but then there are long stretches where it's like a piccolo and a little violin for 10 minutes. You know, so as far as the next game goes, I mean, I think it would just kind of continue to do more of the same. We have our opportunities to go really big, and then we have our opportunities to be really, really introspective.
I would guess that for them, a lot of how the themes end up sounding, I'm sure that they probably give him some idea of the aesthetic of the game, and he does it based off of that. You know, there's that word.
Aesthetic. Sorry.
So I know you mentioned a bunch of tools. Were you guys affected by the closing of Cakewalk and Sonar?
That's a touchy subject for Brad.
Next question. So I've been using Sonar. I'm still using an ancient version of Sonar. It's embarrassing.
Gene.
Hang on a sec. What?
No, it's okay.
Yeah, I use Sonar and have forever. And I've been trying to migrate to another unnamed program. And it's a learning curve. And every time I'm like, okay, I need like 2 months. Leave me alone. I'm going to learn this new software. And everybody's like, awesome, by the way, we've got a video and a DLC and a thing and a thing and a thing, and we need music for it right now. I'm like, shit, I can't. I've been trapped trying to get away from Sonar literally for years. I'm writing the next DLC in it like tonight.
All right, last question.
So when sampling music or sounds for, like, let's say the ski baton, you said you guys use sounds of like the kids' toys. Do you have to get permissions from like companies, even though it's not like necessarily a thing, like the whirring of an engine? Is that like public domain? Or
Thankfully, anything you can record with a recorder is yours,
Yeah.
unless it's like a piece of music. A piece of music is totally different.
Totally different, yeah. But sounds we can do.
If we make it, we can use whatever.
Yeah,
And then we buy
sound-wise.
sample libraries for other things to use.
Okay.
Yeah, when you buy a sample library, part of what you're paying for is the rights to use it however you want.
Yeah, somebody who recorded that, I'm paying for the rights to use his work that he made for everybody else to use, as long as you buy it.
So to answer your question, you own everything you record. Don't worry about it.
So then if somebody's recording this right now, could they use like your voices and
So
stuff?
voice
like,
is a little bit different.
Our company is run by lawyers, so you can do whatever you want.
Yeah. Thank you guys. No.
We need to wrap up so the next panel can come in. These guys will be available after this?
Yeah.
Out in the hallway if you have any more questions. And we will be having a meetup from 4 to 6 at the Irish Whisper. It's like right across the street. If
Yeah, come
anyone
on
would
over.
like to attend, we'll be there for a little bit.
Go,
And we do have some posters.
brave
If
the cold.
anyone would like some ESO posters, we have a few that we brought. You can have them signed by these guys or,
And aren't we
or not.
drinking at the Irish Whistle?
We might have a beverage. Possibly.
Really
Thank you guys
big-
very
Thanks,
much for
everybody.
coming
Thank you,
today.
guys. Appreciate it.